Joining us now, our Washington Bureau Chief Frank Sesno, who has been, Frank, talking with a number of people here in Washington about what it's going to take for the United States to move ahead with some retaliation in the way of cooperation with our allies overseas. Frank.
Judy, talking throughout the day to a number of officials, current administration officials, those who assembled the last grand international coalition in the first Bush administration, and political leaders as well. And let's get some perspective here. What there is remarkable unanimity on is that this is in fact going to be a prolonged effort. Don't think just in terms of military action, though that almost certainly is in the offing as well, but also in terms of concerted and sustained efforts to cut off the money supply, transit capabilities, command and control centers, efforts to coordinate and communicate, not just by the terrorist groups that are associated with these dastardly attacks over the past several days, but in point of fact, as part of a broader campaign, a war, if you will, on terrorism. That's what this administration wants to do, and that's what officials say in this administration, and as I say in previous administrations, say is needed. Now that's going to involve several things. Let me give you some examples. It's going to require strict coordination with the current batch of allies, to include Europe and the friendly states in the Gulf and Russia. Russia, I'm told, is giving some what's called terrific signals back to the U.S. An example, on Tuesday, the Russians had planned military exercises in the Pacific, Judy. The United States said to the Russians that would send an unfortunate and perhaps mixed signal at this particular time. The Russians declined to conduct those investigations. They canceled the maneuvers. They canceled the exercises and said that future exercises they would coordinate with the United States. Elsewhere, in Switzerland and other places, officials say secret bank accounts and that kind of thing are going to have to be tightened up so that the money supply is cut off. Officials say to look for stronger pressure brought to bear on the Saudis, who may have information for sure and perhaps still financing for some of the groups that may be associated with this. So a broad sweep, again, both at home and overseas, an effort that we're told is going to go on for a very, very long time.
All right, Frank, we want you to stay with us, and joining us here in the Washington studio, Brent Scowcroft, General Brent Scowcroft, who was National Security Advisor under former President George H.W. Bush. Yeah. General Scowcroft, you've been listening to Frank talk about how important it is that our allies come on board, that this be a coalition. Why is that so important?
Well, it's very important because terrorism is a worldwide phenomenon in the sense that the terrorist networks are all through the Middle East, up to Kashmir, down through Africa. They're everywhere, and they communicate everywhere. So it's important that we have the cooperation of our friends and allies in finding out what they're doing, where they're going, and especially this time in retaliation, what we want is to demonstrate that terrorism is unacceptable, that this is not a case of freedom fighters. This is a case of pure, unadulterated terrorism, and all countries ought to support.
And Brent Scowcroft, as we talk with you, we're showing pictures of this one of the very first flights, we're told, to leave Dulles Airport near Washington. We're told it is on its way to Tokyo. This, I think, symbolic of the fact that the country is just beginning to get back to normal after the horrific events of Tuesday morning. Having said that, though, General Scowcroft, how can the United States be sure, when it decides to strike, that it's striking the right people?
This is one of the most difficult aspects of dealing with terrorism. How do you know you're striking the right people? And how can you demonstrate that a country who may be harboring them is in fact harboring them, supporting them, and so on? That's a very difficult thing to do.
I'm asking that question, and I want Frank to come in after your answer here too, but because you do hear more and more people now saying, when you bring up the question of innocent civilians, the response is, well, they didn't care about innocent civilians in our country. Why should that be a factor when the United States strikes back? How do you answer that?
Well, unfortunately, we're not judged by the same standards that the terrorists are. And we're judged by some standards of humanity. and some innocent people may be killed in a retaliation. But if we go after the wrong things, the wrong targets and so on, if you remember after the embassy bombings in Africa, President Clinton retaliated. He retaliated in Khartoum against a pharmaceutical plant and in Afghanistan against Osama bin Laden's camp.
Right.
The camp was empty. The pharmaceutical factory was just that. And the president looked like he was uninformed. He looked weak rather than strong.
And as we just pointed out, one of the things the United States is doing by talking about this every day, it seems to me, is sending signals loud and clear to whoever it is we believe is responsible, whether it's Osama bin Laden or someone else, that we're planning this, giving them time to get ready.
That's right.
General Brent Scowcroft joining us. We want to thank you. And now back to Atlanta and Bill Hemmer. Bill.
Judy, thank you. We just watched that plane, Air Nippon, take off from Dulles, headed back to Tokyo, Japan, as Judy pointed out. And we have seen increased traffic at various U.S. airports throughout the day today, starting around noon Eastern time. And Patty Davis has been tracking that and more. Patty, what are you hearing at the various airports across the country?
Well, there is tight security at all of the nation's airports across the country as they ramp up. The FAA is saying that about 70% of those airports are now certified that they do meet the FAA's new increased security standards. Now, those airports include Dulles Airport as well as Atlanta, Los Angeles, the New York airports, Dallas-Fort Worth. They are all open. Notably missing from that, however, Washington's Reagan National Airport. Earlier today, there were snowplows put in place, massive size snowplows put in place by the air traffic control tower to thwart any possible terrorist attack there. Those have now been replaced, we've been told, by concrete barriers. Now, the FAA says that these flights that are in the air, the industry is saying about 1,200 so far today, are not new flights, mostly diverted flights from Tuesday, as well as aircraft being repositioned. The industry trying to reassure passengers who are canceling.
My advice is that it is safe to fly. I will be flying. I know that many of our CEOs of the airlines will be flying, as will others. And I would not fly if it were not safe. I would not ask anyone to fly if it were not safe. And that is why we are taking such significant measures to get people back in the air.
Now, getting those passengers to come back to air travel, obviously critical to the industry, a big economic issue for them. They're stressing those security measures that the FAA has put into place. No curbside check-in, no off-site check-in, no knives to be carried into the airport. Only passengers with tickets allowed to go to the gate. FAA saying, as I said, that about 70% now of the airports are certified to reopen. Still, general aviation not allowed to fly. Those small planes, those corporate jets not allowed to fly. FAA saying the system can't possibly handle all of those flights, including commercial and general aviation at the same time. Overseas carriers also not allowed to come into the United States. The FAA is saying that overseas carriers will in fact be turned back, and I've just been told that there is currently a ground stop in the New York area.
A ground stop in New York, is that right, Patty, at the end there?
That's right.
Which
apparently,
would entail what?
Well, what that means, if there's a ground stop in the New York area, meaning that there are no flights allowed to take off in the New York area. And I'm also being told there's some FBI activity at those airports as well. So we're waiting to get more information on exactly what that situation is developing there.
Patty, quickly here while we have you here, for people who may be venturing out to travel this weekend by air, what are they saying? 2 hours in advance, give yourself to get on that plane, or what?
Well, the industry, the association that represents the industry is saying make sure you're there at least an hour. But Alaska Airlines, in fact, was telling us today, make sure you're there 2 hours in advance. If you show up 20 minutes in advance of these flights, there is no way you're going to get on. You're going to be left at the gate.
Clearly a time for patience. Patty Davis, thanks. Now to Joey, who's with Miles.
Bill, we have with us Miles O'Brien, who is a pilot himself and certainly has a great interest in aviation and what's going on. And in fact, the internet is just a great resource, I guess, of all kinds of things. Additional information. You're able to follow even that flight we were just talking about a short time ago from Dulles.
Yeah, just to clarify, this is some proprietary software with some
Not
internet
just anybody
connectivity.
can jump in.
But basically, if you can get a close-up of this, Mike Hahn, this is ANA Flight 001, which we just saw take off from Dulles Airport. And what this is telling us right now is that it is ascending through 27,000 feet right now. It is traveling at 323 knots. It's a Boeing 747. We know all that. Its departure time, which we just found out, was 5:33 p.m. It arrives. It is Tokyo, I believe, is the destination, at 7:06 a.m. local time. Now, so that is real time of the Washington, D.C. area, Dulles Airport being right in there. Let's take a look at what's going on throughout the entire country as I try to figure out how to get back. Here we go, zoom out. This is mid-Atlantic, okay? You get a sense of how many planes are there. If you can get a little close-up, you can see that seems like an awful lot of traffic. There's our ANA flight, just to give you an idea of where we are. We'll zoom out one more time. That gives you the United States. There's ANA again. And that's what's going on across the United States right now. Every one of those blue dots represents a commercial airline flight at the moment. Now, that seems like a lot probably to you, but that is just a small fraction of what you would see on a normal day in the United States. Now let's go into the New York area, for example, where we just heard about that gate hold. Let's go in a little closer there. You can see that's really a sparse amount of traffic for New York. Here's the tip of Manhattan here. Here's Long Island.
Because they're not all operating at the same altitude or in the same... I mean, it does look like a lot to us, but of course we think of them
right
on a flat plane.
Well, and
they're actually at different
there's a little scale issue here. Obviously, this plane isn't about half the width of Long Island. In order for you to see it properly, there's some scale issues. But nevertheless, what you're seeing is real time of these particular flights. This flight happens to be, well, let's get that out of the way, but that happens to be I don't know what airline that is, but it is descending through 5,000 feet at 250 knots. Now, this one right nearby, seemingly nearby, is probably at an entirely different altitude, and it's actually at 1,500 feet. Flight level 150, 15,000 feet. That's at 391 knots. So what I'm trying to tell you is it's not as perilous a situation as it may look. But the bottom line is the system is coming alive here.
Right, and that is really why you're bringing us this picture. I mean, this is the sort of picture. It doesn't have a lot of practical application to most of us, but this really gives us an idea of the air traffic system back at work.
Yeah, we were looking at Los Angeles a little while ago. That's one of the busiest pieces of airspace in our country. Southern California, as you can see, it looks like planes are stacking up on top of each other, but that's the area around Los Angeles. That is, by any normal standard, a very, very sparse day. Things are starting up, but still not quite where you would expect them to be.
Now, if I were an air traffic controller, is this a picture that I would be looking at, or are they looking at something different?
Well, this is a computer composite of the radar screen information which they're looking at. They're actually looking at real radar screens, the cathode ray tubes, if you will. This just takes that data, compiles it all in one place, and gives us this sort of overall representation. This is not the kind of fidelity you'd want your air traffic controller to have. You might cause some problems.
Little insight on aviation from our Miles O'Brien, a pilot himself, and certainly somebody who has studied a lot of this information. Thanks very much, Miles. All right, we want to go back immediately to Judy now. There's some developing information from Washington. Judy.
Joey, I've just been told that the United States Senate is being evacuated. That, of course, is one half of the capital of the United States. Our producer there, Dana Bash, all we know at this hour, she's saying, is that we don't know the reason, but people are being evacuated from the Senate. I think we do want to put this in some perspective throughout this day. There have been evacuations in Washington, in New York City. We know earlier today the building where CNN's offices are in New York was evacuated. There was a report about LaGuardia Airport in New York. For a fact, here in Washington earlier today, American University had received a threat, and they were canceling classes starting about 10 o'clock this morning. And now, Dana Bash, our producer at the Capitol, is on the phone. Dana, what can you tell us?
Hi, Judy. I can tell you I'm currently standing outside the Senate at the swamp site. There are senators all around me. About 3 minutes ago, I was standing outside the Senate chamber when a police officer said, everybody must evacuate now. Don't ask questions. Just leave the building immediately. And then there was a mass exodus to the exits. Everybody ran out. I just quickly talked to Senator John Breaux from Louisiana. He said that the police came onto the Senate floor where they were actually having a vote, and they said, just get out. ask questions, just get out. And he said that everybody ran for the doors. I'm currently standing, like I said, right across from the plaza on the lawn looking at the Capitol, and there are just senators all around kind of looking around, trying to figure out what's going on, where to go. Nobody really knows, but everybody is pretty much calm. Everybody looks relatively calm. Before